Hello BookTube! I would like to say I'm sorry for being absent for so long. There is a valid reason for this. It is the fact that my phone, which is now back with me, miraculously, I left it in Brighton at the end of July? Yes, at the end of July. And it then went all the way to London, all the way to Heathrow, got flown here and brought here by courier. So some lovely person in Brighton handed it in when they found it, which is amazing, and thank you to that person. So yeah, I haven't had a recording device, but yeah, never mind, and yeah, sorry about the delay. But let's get straight into it. The first book I read in the month of August, George R. Martin's A Clash of Kings, which is a beast. I did briefly talk about this in my July wrap-up, because I read about 500 pages of this in July and finished it off in August. I have to say I didn't love this. Now, yes, Q haters, I know. I loved Game of Thrones. I absolutely adored it, and I really, really didn't expect to. But with this one, I just didn't find it as much fun. I don't know. Maybe because it's so thick. It is really, really, really big book. And I don't necessarily like big books that take me quite a while. I like to zoom through books so that I stay in the excitement of it and it doesn't get stale for me. And this did get stale. I found that it was kind of a lot of... I mean, I don't know how much I can say without giving away a spoiler from the first book, but in the first book it's sort of all happening and the sort of empire is just starting to sort of divide, and in this one it's more the divisions have occurred and they're sort of moving slowly towards each other, so it's kind of quite disjointed. The characters are quite separated, and I just didn't feel like much happened. I felt it was very much a joiner book. I'm sorry, but I did. And for the length of it, I mean, to be fair, I'm not used to reading fantasy, and I'm not used to reading big books. I know fantasy lovers, a lot of fantasy is, excuse my dog, big books, but yeah, I'm not used to it, so that's probably a lot to do with it. Also, I think because I went into a Game of Thrones thinking, I know everybody says this is amazing, but I'm not going to like it, loved it, so I went into this with high expectations, which I think ruined it for me. I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't hate it, I just found it slightly dull. I'm still going to carry on, you know. I also felt with that one, I only left it a few months between books, but I couldn't really remember characters, so it'll be useful. I mean, I said this before when I spoke about this book, it'd be useful to write down, if you're just starting the first book, to write down everybody and a brief summary of what they do, because there is a lot of characters, and it's not necessarily that you have trouble keeping track of the characters, but it's just that I found I couldn't remember a lot of the characters from the first book. So either read them in concession, which would take a long time, so I wouldn't recommend, or, as I say, just keep note of what the characters do, because otherwise you will just be like, eh. Then I read Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler, illustrated by Myra Kalman. Daniel Handler, I didn't know, is actually Lemony Snicket. Sorry to spoil things for you, but yes, I didn't know that when I read this. I only learnt that after when I watched a review of it, so that's interesting. I have to say, I adored this book. It is absolutely gorgeous. Basically, in this, it's basically a breakup letter to a boyfriend. It's sort of young adult-y, and it's this young girl has broken up with her first love and has put all the items of their relationship in a box and is sending that box to him with a letter which explains what each item in there has to do with their relationship. You get a picture of each item and a description of what it had to do with it, and generally why that led to them breaking up. And it is just absolutely gorgeous. I have to say, when I first started reading this, I found it really difficult. The first few pages, I was just like, this is stupidly written, I can't read this, because it's almost a bit, I suppose, hipster, you could say, language in there. Typical American teenagers, I suppose, but it was really off-putting for me in the first few pages, but please persevere, because after the first few pages it didn't even register with me, and I loved it. It was gorgeous, really sweet. I really needed it at the time, I think, and the spine is gorgeous too. So yeah, just definitely one of my favourites now. It's just gone straight up there. There we go. Then I read Wild by Cheryl Strayed. This is basically a memoir of Cheryl Strayed's journey across the Pacific Crest Trail. Yes, it's a trail walk across mountains, I think, in America. And at 22, basically, her mother died, which then led to the breakup of her marriage and pretty much the loss of everything. And she just said, you know what, screw this, I'm going on a trail. And she did, and it was, you know, life-changing and all the rest of it. I have to say, I kind of went into this thinking it would be like Eat, Pray, Love, and it was, but it wasn't at the same time. Like Eat, Pray, Love, when I read that, it really spoke to me. It was really beautiful and special. I don't know whether that's because there's a lot of spiritual stuff in there as well. I don't know. With this, I enjoyed it. It was a nice story of self-discovery and journey. It was really well written, but I did feel like not much happened, really. It's basically literally just about her time on the trail, the people she meets while she's on the trail, and why she felt she had to do it. So give it a go. If you're into, like, women travellers and things like that, and I definitely would recommend it if you liked Eat, Pray, Love, but don't expect quite so much from it, I would say. I don't know whether I just read Eat, Pray, Love at the right perfect time in my life. That might well be it, but yeah. And then I read Requiem for a Dream by Hubert Selby Jr. This is a reread for me. I read this when I was about 16, 17 and absolutely loved it because I loved the film. And I haven't read it for ages. I'm not really one to do rereads, so a lot of the time I sort of go in cynically and think, oh, I'm going to find this dull because I know what's going to happen. But with this, I actually still enjoyed it, so that was good. Basically, for those of you who haven't seen the film or anything like that, it's kind of pretty much about the loss of dreams, and yeah, it's just pretty depressing. It's predominantly dealing with heroin addiction, and it's basically Harry is what you would call our main character, I suppose. He is a heroin addict. His mother is also, it follows sort of three separate storylines. So there's Harry, who's the heroin addict, Marion, who is his girlfriend, who is obviously also getting into heroin addiction, and Sarah Goldfarb is his mother, and she's got her whole other own stuff going on. And it's a really sad book. There's especially some stuff at the end which is quite distressing concerning Sarah's story. I think Sarah's story is probably the best one in this book because it just shows you, like, she's not a bad person. She doesn't take drugs. I mean, not that people who take drugs are bad people automatically, but her situation is not her fault at all, if you know what I mean, and it's so sad. Basically, with Sarah, what happens is that she is addicted to television, basically. It's all she watches, because she's an old lady, you know, her son is off taking heroin, he doesn't really care, and, yeah, she just sits there all day watching television. She then gets a call saying that she's going to be on a quiz show, and it becomes an obsession of hers, and it messes her a lot, and she goes on a diet, and it's a lot about the American healthcare system in here. I mean, this was written in the 70s, I think it was, so it's not a necessarily modern view on it, but it's a very interesting take on what American healthcare was like in the 70s, which is interesting. And Marion's story as well I really enjoyed, because there's some bits where she sort of goes off on a rant about her views on the world, and they're really lovely. Well, not lovely, they're depressing and dull, but I quite like depressing and dull things. There's a bit where she goes on about how, you know, we treat this life as a practice run for the next life, but without realising that this is the life right now happening here. And that, I think, is so true, and I remember that really spoke to me when I was, like, 17. So, yeah, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not into sort of depressing stuff, because it is depressing. There's nothing really happy about this. There's no light at the end of the tunnel with this one. But it's really well written and really good. I have a very unique use of punctuation in this book. There is no speech marks, which I find very, very odd. But I have to say, when I first read it, I found it really distracting for the first few pages, and by the end of it I didn't even notice, and the same happened again here. This time I thought I would be more used to the idea, seeing as I knew it was going to happen, but even so, in the first few pages it confused me. There is one scene where I don't feel like it quite flows, but I think you have to realise that in that scene, which is the only scene where there's a lot of people really, there is only really your four predominant characters in this, so that's how you can keep track of who's speaking. You get used to the sort of speech patterns of each character, but there is a scene quite near to the beginning when we're meeting Marion, I think it is, and there's quite a few of their friends there, and I found that quite distracting. I didn't really know who was saying what, but the thing to remember is that it doesn't really matter who's saying what, and that, you know, they're not going to become big characters. You don't need to sort of keep track, really. As long as you can keep track of your 4 main voices, you're fine. And honestly, it's not as off-putting as you would think. It's actually quite interesting because he obviously really had to stretch himself to make each voice so distinct that we could tell. So it's an interesting technique. So yeah, I would recommend that to someone who's into bleak stuff, as I say. Then I read Resistance by Owen Shears. Now, my feelings about this were really conflicted, and still are, really. I think it's a beautiful piece of work. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a book written for entertainment purposes, though. Basically, this is about a world where Nazis have won the Second World War, or are in the process of winning. They're pretty much victorious, and it's in a Welsh valley. It follows the women of this Welsh valley and the sort of takeover of the Welsh valley, as it were. All the men from the valley, we realise in the beginning, have gone missing overnight. Nobody knows where they are. The women don't know, so they're all left on their own, which obviously causes a bit of anxiety with the German soldiers about and all of that. If the German soldiers find out, what's going to happen to the women and stuff like this. In the end, a group of German soldiers do invade the valley, but they pretty much say to the women, we're happy to stay here because we have had enough of the war, so if you're willing to live in harmony, so are we. And it's a really nice relationship that forms between them. I would say, as I say, it's written lovely, and it's very much, you get the feeling that it is just this calm, harmonious, floaty place that is detached from what's happening in the world. And it's really interesting technique how that has really come across. But, as I say, it's quite slow, not happens, and I wouldn't say it's a book to be read for just enjoyment purposes, like on the beach or whatever. It's definitely not one of those books, because it's not necessarily plot-based, which seems strange when you know what it's about, because it sounds like such a gripping topic. But it's very much the calm in the storm, and I mean, they're completely cut off from society. You really get that feeling in the book. It's like having mufflers on and all this mayhem's going on, but you only know what you can see, sort of thing. And I think that's really well done in this. I really, really did feel just peaceful, and it's like honey washing over you the way it's written. But obviously everything in the world has gone wrong, so it's really well written. As I say, it would be an interesting book to study, but yeah, it's not necessarily the fastest book in the world. So I was kind of torn because I was expecting it to be quite happening, and it wasn't. But it was beautiful in its unique way. Then I read Raymond Carver's Shortcuts. This is a short story collection. I say I read it, I finished it, which is a bit of a cheat because I have been reading this on and off for a few years now. Basically, I sort of flit with writing short stories, but I never actually seem to enjoy reading them, though I am reading more at the moment, which I will be talking about to you soon, and I'm really enjoying them. But with Raymond Carver, I don't know. I know he's the godfather of the short story, and, props to him for doing that. But I think I would get him more if I was American. I really get that feeling. There's just something about his short stories that leave me thinking, did I miss something? Do I need to flip back a few pages? Or am I just being thick? Am I not picking up on stuff? I don't know. It would be interesting to go back and reread this, having now gotten into short stories slightly more, but I just felt like I was missing stuff. I have got What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, which is another of his short story collections, which I will be reading. I've read a few of them, and again, I just kind of feel like, at the end, and I don't like feeling like that. Like, I think the idea of Raymond Carver is that he very much gives you a snippet of life, a snippet of what's happening, and it's just a snapshot, which I know a short story is, but I feel like I just need a little bit more than I get with him. So yeah, I was torn between it. There wasn't really. Then I finished the month with The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. Loved this. Again, it's become one of my favourites. I have to say, it wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. I don't really know how to tell you about that without giving away spoilers, though I assume that most of you have seen the film, so most of you should know what I'm talking about. Basically, this is a story of two lines, really. We get Bastian in the beginning, who is a young schoolboy. He ends up stealing a book from a bookshop and hiding in the school attic to read it. We then go into the story of the book that he is reading, and in the story of the book that he is reading, it is basically about Fantastica, this magical world, and the fact that it's falling apart, basically. The childlike empress who rules everything is ill and dying, and if she dies, the world will end, basically. And sort of as she gets iller, spaces of nothing are appearing. So the way it's described is that, you'll be looking at a lake and it's there, and then suddenly it's like you're blind, you can't see it anymore. It's not even not there. It's nothing. And so the childlike empress actually sort of hires, I suppose, Atreyu to a young boy in the world to solve the problem and try and find out why this is happening, even though she knows he needs to go on the journey to find out why. He does, and as it's going on, you kind of realise that Bastian is possibly involved. Little things like he'll gasp and Atreyu will hear him in the book, and yeah, strange stuff happens, basically. I don't want to give away too much, and it's really difficult because I now want to tell you why I was a bit disappointed in the second half of the book. Basically, for those of you who've seen the film, you know what happens, you know where the film ends. The book continues from that point. Where the film ends, it's only about not even halfway through the book. It then goes on, and even though I liked it still, and the ending of this is actually really beautiful as well, I felt like I can see why they left it out of the film, basically. I didn't think it was necessary, but it didn't take anything away, but it didn't necessarily add anything as well, so, meh. But definitely recommended, and if you haven't seen the film, I'd say read the book and then watch the film. And it's definitely, even though it's a kid's book, it's definitely one more for adults, I think. It's one of those kids' books that you probably enjoy more when you're grown up, because you can really appreciate the sentiment and the fact that, it is very much about lost innocence and the fact that the dreams are sort of taken away from you when you're an adult. So, yeah, really enjoyed that. That's everything. Again, sorry for the delay. I should be around more now that I have my phone back. And, yeah, bye.